We're going to move ahead, and we're going to introduce you to Mr. Kimball. Good evening. Welcome. My name is Nancy Kay, and I am the president of the American Association of University Women.
And I am Roland Richmond, the president of the League of Women Voters of Humboldt County. The League of Women Voters has been accepting men since 1973. Both of our organizations are committed to the concept that informed and active citizens are a critical part of the democratic process. Facts matter, and we need to vote intelligently, not emotionally. We need to know facts, to measure the facts against our own values and beliefs.
And so for that reason, AAUW and the League partnered and invited Richard Kimball to speak with us today. Richard Kimball is well acquainted with the political process. He has worked inside the Beltway. He's been a member of a U.S. Congressman's staff. He's been the assistant press secretary for a U.S. senator, and he's been the press secretary for another U.S. senator. And he has been elected himself to public office. He has served as the state senator in Arizona, his home state. And I think we have music. Anyway.
And I'll keep going. Mr. Kimball had a vision of how to improve the availability of facts for voters. In 1992, along with an impressive board of directors, including political offices such as Presidents Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford, Senators Barry Goldwater and George McGovern, William Proxmire, and Governor Michael Dukakis, to name just a few. Mr. Kimball created Vote Smart, a nonpartisan nonprofit. We are grateful that he's come here this evening to talk with us. Please give a warm welcome of Humboldt County to the president and co-founder of Vote Smart, Richard Kimball.
Wow. Thank you very much, Nancy. Nancy Kay is into obviously a lot of work to put this on. I did forget to ask her if she was related to Mary. How are you? No relation, okay. I was going to hit you up for a big contribution if it was the case. I'm hoping I can do this presentation, with such a great turnout and such great PR before I got here about, people don't come to voter education talks. Their eyes glaze over in boredom and they run for the hills. So I don't know what the hell's going on here, but this is very weird. This is very weird. Anyway, they can't get the sound up, and so showing you some of these fun commercials and some of the other stuff that's all a big part of this presentation is going to be a silent movie here if we aren't able to get it up. I want to introduce to you my wife. We're sort of the short and tall of it. She's standing right in the, there she is, she's waving at the back of the room. I usually ask my wife to sit right in the front row and look up at me while I speak adoringly and hanging on every word, sort of a Nancy Reagan kind of thing, but she's never been willing to do it, so I'm just out of luck. And I have to kill some time. So what I'm going to say here for the next minute or two, while we hopefully get sound, has only tangentially to do with the presentation, because I don't want to give that away. I have to warn you a little bit. I know probably most of you are political partisans of one sort or another. I have a dislike, an intense dislike for both parties equally. And as a rule, all members of the board at Vote Smart, when they talk about Vote Smart, which very few people know about, We use our friends and ourselves as examples of the abuse. So don't take it too personally, because I was a Democrat. I'm going to use myself and what I did and what some of my friends did in my end of the party as examples of the abuse. And I will give you one story about the beginning of Vote Smart. Are we ready?
I think so.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm going to test it here first. Come on, baby, you go there. Let's see if we get sound. What is all this other stuff up here? Oh, I see. Okay. You cannot leave. Okay. You hear that? It's pretty light. Yeah! Okay. Okay, well, I just switched it to the beginning here so I oops. Well, we'll move it back there again. Back there again. I've never used this operation, so, okay, I'm going to hit it just right. Boom. Okay, freeze. Okay, sorry to tell you a story, so I'll go ahead and finish it, even though it's not part of my presentation. Vote Smart started for every member of the board a little differently, but basically the same issue was anchoring our interest in creating this years ago in research. In my case, I said I was a Democrat. I was in the state Senate representing Phoenix for years. I was a corporation commissioner running utilities and stuff in the state, and I was the chairman of that for years. And somehow I found myself as the Democratic nominee, winning the primary when Barry Goldwater retired in Arizona. I was doing pretty well in the campaign, did some flubs during the election, and towards the end it fell apart. And you see this with all major campaigns for U.S. Senate, governor, Congress, that sort of thing. When a candidate's in trouble, they have to do something to shake it up, make the public look at them again, give them a second look, and that usually requires something dramatic. In my case, and I was running against a relatively unknown congressman from Mesa who won the Republican Party nomination. It's how I became known as the dead body that John McCain walked into the U.S. Senate over. Anyway, we were in trouble, and we decided John has a temper. We're friends, by the way. He's been on my board for 6 years. We loved Project Vote Smart and the whole idea, but we weren't all that friendly when we were running against each other. But I was in trouble, and we knew John had a temper, and so we thought we would stir it up during the primetime televised debate in Arizona, and I would make him so angry with some outlandish attacks that he couldn't help but take a swing at me. And we thought that would break it open. And the problem occurred during the last commercial break when I was very young, this was 30 years ago, and in my early 30s, and I looked at him during the commercial break before I was about to give my closing argument where I was going to do this horrible thing. And I realized I didn't dislike him. And I didn't want to say that. There's a lot about him I admired, and I didn't want to say this stuff about him. And which made me very nervous, and my knees started shaking, because if you give up your closing argument that you had planned and practiced in the key moment in the debate, and you're young and you don't have all that much experience, things like your knees start shaking. And my knees were really, I thought people were going to see it, and I remember I jammed them together. And then I thought, oh no, everybody's going to think I have to pee or something. And I really didn't know what to do. And but when the camera came back on, I never have looked at it. You can probably find it on YouTube if you want, but I can remember what I said almost word for word. I looked into the camera and I said, understand what it is we do to you. Speaking to the audience in the auditorium there and in the TV. Understand what it is we do to you. We spend all of our time collecting money. big money from people we do not know who are going to expect access to us if we happen to win. And we both are spending this money in the same three ways. The first thing we do is a market analysis of you. Just the way Campbell's Soup and Kellogg's do, we just try to figure out what it is you want to purchase in the political marketplace. We find out these things very precisely. We know what black voters want versus white voters, men versus women, younger voters versus older voters. We know what you want when we do that. The second thing we do with the money is we then hire consultants. I remember going like this. I said, we hire that consultant to tailor our message to fit what we then know you want to buy. And the third thing we do, the most expensive thing we do, is buy all the media time necessary to bombard you with the meaningless, issueless nonsense that inevitably results. And whichever one of the two of us can do this to you best is going to win. The audience was just as silent. They looked at me, this is a crazy kook up here. But I said my piece. I've been thinking about it for a long time during the election. A few weeks later, I was in Barry Goldwater's office, who was a friend of my father's and I adored, even though he was on the opposite side of the political issues from me. I just thought the world of him, and he chased everybody out of his office and made me sit down, and I felt like a kid in front of him. And I sat down, and he started talking to me, blowing up about my closing argument, not angry at it, telling me that he got involved in politics in Phoenix, Arizona, running for city council because he felt passionate about the issues. He wanted to have his day in the public forum, have his say and make his arguments because he thought he was right, and that's what fueled him in politics. And he said he hadn't done it in years because we as Democrats kept funding these enormously wealthy and expensive candidates against him, spending millions and millions of dollars trying to knock him off, and he had to spend all of his time collecting money doing what I would crudely suggested during that closing argument. And he thought it was dishonorable activity. And he just didn't want to do it anymore, and that was one of the reasons he got out of office. That was the beginning of Vote Smart, a long time ago. Okay. I haven't told that story in a long time, so. Okay. What am I here talking about today? I can't remember. Okay. My wife likes to criticize me because she says that I am too depressing. That I depress everybody in my audience, and I've got to stop it and tell jokes and lighten up. And I tried to think of jokes. Coming here, I tried to think of jokes, and I know a lot of jokes, but I can't really think of any but one that I thought of that would be at all suited for an audience. I really have a lot of sympathy for humorists, political humorists. Normally, political humorists find some faux pas that some candidate made. Maybe it's Gerald Ford knocking his head against the plane, or it could be any silly little things, or maybe they said something or misspoke or whatever it is, and they take it and they put it into the extreme. And that's where the humor comes from. You turn something simple into something extraordinary. But start off with the extraordinary, it's a little harder to make it more extraordinary and find humor. And you find it all over on both sides of the political aisle these days. I'm going to give you a quote. Oh, let me tell you the joke first. This is your one chance to laugh. Okay, this is from a former boss of mine when I was a young man named Mo Udall. Some of you may remember his name, a long time ago, a congressman from Arizona. He used to like to say, this isn't his exact joke, I've kind of tweaked it for this audience or this purpose, but he used to like to say, in Arizona, we know what the basic difference is between a cactus and a Congress, and it's that on a cactus, all of the pricks are on the outside. No. Okay. Remember that bit of humor, because that's about all you're going to get. Here is another quote from a congressman. Murder, robbery, rape, and incest will be openly taught and practiced. The air will be rent with the cries of the distressed, the soil soaked in blood, the nation black with crimes, if you elect Thomas Jefferson, President of the United States. Dishonorable politicians are not new in politics. There have always been some. My point today will be that today they are not only expected to enter the political arena now and then, but they are accepted, even welcomed and encouraged by the citizens. There is no penalty for dishonorable conduct. Here's another quote. Liberty cannot be, from a congressman, liberty cannot be preserved without general knowledge amongst the people who have an indisputable, inalienable, indefeasible, divine right to that most dreaded and envied kind of knowledge. I speak of the character and conduct of our rulers. That was John Adams on the Constitutional Convention. He was worrying about what he was about to do. John Adams was the firebrand that drove through the acceptance of the Constitution at that convention and agreed to make a big compromise he didn't want to do himself in order to make sure the nation could hang together. That was John Adams worrying about what he wanted to do. Here's another quote from the youngest member of that convention. Popular government without popular information or the means of acquiring it is but a prologue to a farce or a tragedy, or perhaps both. A people that mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power that knowledge gives. That was the young guy there. That was James Madison. He came in with the principal draft that became the Constitution. He was the principal drafter of the Bill of Rights, the Federalist Papers, and there's no statue to him in Washington, which just ticks me off. Here's the one last quote, and you'll all recognize this, I hope. If you haven't, you certainly read it once in your life if you ever visited Washington, D.C., because you saw it printed right behind his statue. A nation that expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization expects what never was and never will be. That was Thomas Jefferson. All of these people were worried about what they were going to do. They didn't worry about it the way you and I do. I mean, we've lived under a struggle to self-govern since we were all born, if you're in this country. It's natural to us. It wasn't natural to them. It was basically anchored in a philosophy. And they weren't deciding whether or not this was the best of various forms of government. They were deciding whether or not they were willing to commit treason. They believe it so strongly, a philosophy, an unproven system, so strongly that they were willing to die. And everybody on the planet Earth but them thought they were going to die. All of Western culture was sure they could not pull this off against the greatest power the world had ever known. They worried about it the way we should all worry about it. And I don't know if you've ever thought about it this way, but this is the way they would have thought about it. The way you should think about it, and that is that you want to win the power to run your life, to tell you what you can and cannot do, the power to set the punishments you will suffer if you do not obey, take that power after winning it and throw it away to millions and millions of people you do not know and have no ability to ever know. To fight for that unnatural thing without ensuring that those people have access to abundant, accurate, relevant information would be a stupid thing to fight for. And that's why they were worried about it. They were worried that it would be lost to factions, which was their term of special interest. They were worried that they would be bamboozled and abused and not educated and informed enough to somehow collectively enter a voting booth and magically be good to you versus all the other forms of government. I'm going to show you some samples here. The staff and students, you don't know this probably, but 9,000 students working full-time, 40-hour work weeks for 10-week shifts are primarily responsible for everything that is Vote Smart. 9,000 of them over years doing the most painstaking, boring, monotonous, repetitive, hellish research you can possibly imagine. They put some of this stuff together for me. This first little bit is some billboards they found. Just out of thousands of them they could have chosen. They chose these. Just a little sampling to sort of warm you up. There's no limit to how outrageous it's becoming. I'm going to show you 3 television commercials here to try to put us all on the same page in terms of the history of this abuse. The first one I'm going to show you is the second television commercial ever produced. It was done by Adlai Stevenson. Now most of you look old enough to remember who Adlai was. Some of you not. He was the Democratic nominee for president against Eisenhower in the 1950s. Anyway, his campaign manager was a young kid by the name of Russ Hemingway, who was alive until 2 years ago, and a big supporter of Vote Smart. And Russ told me this story, and I just couldn't believe it, that he was so intuitive. He said he was sitting in his Chicago office at the beginning of the campaign, and he saw Eisenhower's commercial. Eisenhower did the first one. And he panicked and got in his car, took off down through Illinois or Kentucky or somewhere, trying to run down Stevenson, who was on a whistle-stop tour, where they would sit on the back of the train and stop in every burg and talk to people and then go and do a number of stops every day. He got on the train, ran down Stevenson, and said, Stevenson, he said, Adlai, you got to get off this thing. You've got to get out there and cut a television commercial. Eisenhower is talking to millions of people in their living room around the dining room table. You can't compete with that in a whistle-stop tour. You've got to go cut a commercial. And Stevenson refused. He said this to Russ. He said, if we are to advertise ourselves like boxes of cereal, democracy will die. For you could not win the presidency without proving you were unworthy of the job. Now, by that definition, everybody is telling you don't vote for me by Adlai's description of it. But Adlai, political prudence won out, and a month or two later, he said, geez, I really can't compete with this. He's talking to millions, I'm talking to a couple hundred every one of these stops. So he cuts a commercial, and you're going to see that commercial that Adlai cut. The second commercial is, without doubt, the most famous political commercial ever created, certainly in political science circles. It's called the Daisy commercial, and I want to give you the background to it. Barry Goldwater and Jack Kennedy were friends. They admired each other. They liked each other. They actually talked. If Barry won the nomination for president of the Republican Party and ran against Jack, that they would campaign largely together. around the country, that they would do Lincoln Douglas style debates on their philosophy, trying to help educate people about issues, trying to hear what they had to say, really a democratic sort of participatory, educational, value discussion of options dealing with issues facing society. Of course, Jack Kennedy got shot, and Johnson was an entirely different beast. Whether you like him or dislike him is not really relevant to this, but he was one son of a bitch. He hated Goldwater. Goldwater was asked this question in the campaign by a reporter. The reporter asked him, would you consider using nuclear weapons if we get into a conflict in Southeast Asia? And Goldwater gave the standard response that every Western leader had ever since the invention of the bomb. He said, it's another weapon. I'm not going to expose my position, the position of our nation, in front of the nation's enemies. It's completely inappropriate to do, so I'm not going to tell you what I would and would not do. Nothing unusual about the answer. But Johnson and his people saw their chance. This was right after the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, when a lot of us are digging holes in our backyard to survive what was about to happen between Khrushchev and the rest of our country. My job, I remember as a kid, was to collect all the canned goods and stick them in a trunk. I was scared to death. A couple times my mom found me in the bathroom crying. I was sure it was going to happen. I was sure we were going to go in. We just came out of that kind of nightmare when that was going to happen. And Johnson saw his chance with Goldwater's answer. So he created the Daisy commercial claiming that Goldwater was crazy and was going to begin a Holocaust. Everybody in my generation I'm running into swears to God they saw the commercial. Johnson only had to pay to play it one time on television. NBC News, CBS, and ABC all kept replaying it because they'd never seen anything quite like it and were asking the question, is Goldwater nuts? Is this actually true? They were questioning the validity of the commercial, and was it that nutty? And as Goldwater would tell me for years afterwards, it's hard to run for president of the United States when your stump speech becomes, it's okay to vote for me, I'm not crazy. The third commercial I'm going to show you, you've never seen. It never played. It was Johnson's backup commercial. He never played it because he never needed it. He never dreamed the Daisy commercial would be so dramatically successful and trash the campaign. And I'll let it speak for itself on another issue of the same period.
Vote Stevenson, vote Stevenson, a man you can believe in, son. From Illinois, whence Lincoln came, his leadership has won him fame. A soldier man is always bound to think in terms of battleground. But Stevenson, civilian son, will lead us till the peace is won.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 6, 8, 9, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
We represent the majority of the people in Alabama who hate niggerism, Catholicism, Judaism, and all the isms of the whole world. So said Robert Creel of the Alabama Ku Klux Klan. He also said, I like Barry Goldwater. He needs our help. Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd.
Johnson was not a racist. I mean, Goldwater. But he didn't need the commercial, so that didn't flame up. We learned as political operatives, which I was the press secretary to Daniel Moynihan, deputy press secretary to Walter Mondale, and had other political operative jobs. But we learned something enormously valuable back then, and that is that it is much, much cheaper, much more efficient and economical to move people emotionally rather than move them intellectually. You can move people's prejudice and passions, and the most popular thing to move, which is fear, you can do that in 30 seconds. You cannot move people intellectually on options, dealing with society's issues in 30 seconds, so you're not very prudent if you try. And so it all goes to the emotional end. Of course, doing that requires a lot of money. Now, I got to tell you, I know some people get passionate about money issues. Let's do campaign finance reform or the Supreme Court decision or do all that stuff. I got to tell you, the public doesn't care about it. It's never rated in the top 10 issues in American society, never made even the top 10. And I know this because I started with John Gardner in politics after Watergate, trying to get a handle on this at an organization called Common Cause back when it was my first job in politics. It never rated much. It's just isn't important to the public. They think it's, maybe they agree with the Supreme Court, I don't know, maybe they just see it as free speech, I don't know. But I can tell you, I thought it was important when I was in politics, and all my friends thought it was important when we were in politics, and all my fellow political consultants on both sides of the aisle thought it was our lifeblood. And as candidates, we thought it was everything, and we spend 70, 80, 90% of our campaign time collecting it, so we kind of think it's important. One of the students wanted to demonstrate exactly what had happened to money. You have to, if you know a little bit about American history, you have to understand the first 100 years in political history in the country, candidates offered themselves up for public service. And if they went out and said, vote for me, me, and the other guy's a jerk, if they said that, they would have lost votes. It was not considerable honorable conduct. Even McKinley never left his front porch running for president of the United States. And they didn't consider it honorable behavior. Citizens, our fathers and fathers' fathers, considered that not honorable. Now, their supporters would go out and trash each other quite a bit. But we didn't as candidates. We learned, tell this story. I don't know, maybe I won't tell this story. What the hell? Okay. I want to get a sense of how candidates get roped into this. All the members of the founding board of Vote Smart, about 40 of them, have very similar stories. They're not identical to the one I'm going to tell you, and a lot of them are more interesting than the one I'm going to tell you, but you're stuck with me. Here I am. I'm a candidate for the United States Senate. I don't have a lot of money. I'm not independently wealthy. In the first few weeks after winning the primary, I'm able to raise $30,000, $40,000. I thought that was great. My family was chipping in. They were holding big sales and doing all sorts of stuff. I had thousands, a few thousand volunteers willing to walk the streets. That was where my power was, my ability to maybe pull it off. And I get a call. My call comes from the AFL-CIO. They fly me out to Washington, D.C., take me to their building, which is right across from the White House in Lafayette Park, with the Chamber of Commerce across the street from their old warring days. And labor used to be a lot more influential in politics than it is today. About 30 years ago, it still had some power. Anyway, they called me, and they met me at the airport and took me to their building, and they took me into a room, well, it was about 12 feet by 12 feet, very small room with a couple of couches in it. And I found myself sitting there with 6 other candidates for the United States Senate, including a few incumbents. And we're just sitting there jawing it, and we're all waiting for what I refer to as our sort of 15 minutes of Andy Warhol AFL-CIO fame, when we're going to be taken in one at a time and make a presentation to COPE, which was the political arm of labor. My turn came up. I went in, and it was an enormous conference room, easily bigger than this, with one table in it that stretched down the entire length of the room. You could have put some pool tables on it and shot pool and not interfered with any of these people. So in big leather chairs around it, some smoking cigars. I mean, it was right out of a sort of Hollywood production. And I was a little nervous. I was a little young, but I don't remember what I said. But somehow, at the end of it, Perkins, who was the president of it, said, "Well, boy, Richard, we'd sure think you'd make a great U.S. Senator, and we'd like to start you off today with this $50,000 check." And I thought, wow, that's illegal. And it was, from my perspective. I told you I had a lot of background in campaign finance reforms back then, but it wasn't. They did something that a lot of people did to me in those early days in politics. He put his arm around me and said, now, Richard, we want you to understand that all of these unions around the table, the steel workers, the carpenters, the truckers, the dock workers, blah, 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 they all have their own individual political action committee. And we just simply like to gather together and bundle it together and send it as a unit and be more powerful that way. And that's the way, and that was legal, and that's the way lots of organizations, corporations, and all sorts get around and circumvented the intent of those early laws about campaign finance. And you think about that as a candidate. Okay, well, that's legal. Okay, boy, I could sure use $50,000. And they said, well, wait a minute, Richard. And they handed me literally an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that had maybe 15 names on it. And they said, we'd like you to spend the first $20,000 of this $50,000 to hire one of these pollsters, survey specialists that we have a lot of confidence in. They can go back to Arizona and measure what people like and dislike about you, what they like and dislike about your opponent, and do an evaluation of how things are looking in Arizona. And you think about that as a candidate, and you think, well, they're not asking me to do anything bad. I'd be kind of curious to see what people think from a survey point of view. And you think, okay, well, that's fine. I'll take the $30,000 that's left. And they said, wait a minute. And they handed me another sheet of paper with about the same number of names on it. And I always remembered the expression Perkins used. He said, these are some people that have some trophies on the wall. What he meant by that was that these were people, consultants, that had been in other states, gubernatorial races, U.S. Senate races, congressional races, that they can take the polling and survey information and tailor a message, tailor messages and stump speeches and commercials that will help ensure your victory. And I got ticked off at the meeting. And I said, this is my campaign. I'm running because I feel passionate about the issue, Star Wars, Contra 8, all the issues way back in those days. And I sort of got a little steamy with them, and they said, no, Richard. We don't want to stop you from saying whatever it is you want to say in the campaign. And I don't know that unless you've been in politics and run for major office, you've ever made this kind of calculation. Let me just stop there for a second and tell you that when I was running for the U.S. Senate, I was going door to door with a lot of people, a lot of friends, knocking on empty door after empty door after empty door during the weekday and leaving my name saying, sorry, I missed you. And I started to daydream one day, and I found that, wouldn't it be great if at the next door there were 100 people in the backyard at a barbecue, and they invited me in and gave me an hour to talk to them, say why I was doing this crazy thing. What I thought, listen to what they thought, had a real discussion with them about the pros and cons of the various options and issues facing society, doing real government stuff, doing real self-governance stuff that you hope is what the process is all about. And then I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if at the next door there's another 100 people, and then another 100 people, and another 100 people. I get an hour with each one. And then I started to daydream, maybe I don't have to sleep, and I can do that 24 hours. And maybe I don't need to take a day off, and I can do it 7 days a week, and I never take a break. And I do this consistently for the months left in the election. And I added it up in my head that if I was so brilliant, so articulate, so successful that I convinced every single one of them to vote for me, I get almost 2 percentage points on election day. 2%. You don't win that way. Now I forgot what the hell I was saying. I didn't mean to do. Oh, yeah. So he put his arm around me and said, yeah, Richard, that's the way we can go back to your home state and go door to door and say whatever you want, and all those people and do those things, but we're not stupid. We're not going to give you $50,000 and the close to $1 million that came pouring in from labor interests right after that, and say, "Boy, you sure look like a nice guy, Richard. You sure seem nice. We sure do like you. We sure hope to see you in the United States Senate someday. Good luck to you." That's not the way it works, Richard. We need to make sure that you're smart enough to spend this hard-earned labor money from laborers all over this country in ways that will help ensure your victory. Because we need you, Richard, in the United States Senate. I took the money. They found out I was very unpopular on all my issues in Arizona. They created a commercial of me with the Grand Canyon and Arizona horses and picking Arizona orange trees of their fruit, as humiliating as you could possibly imagine. And you would train not to answer questions. Obviously, I didn't like Star Wars. I thought the money ought to be spent better elsewhere. And so they wanted me, every time I got issued a question about Star Wars, I would talk about education or the environment or something, one of my strengths, and not answer the question. You're trained not to do it. Today, you don't even need the training. You just ignore the question entirely. Whether it be in a debate or anywhere, you say, "Oh, that's a nice question, but I want to talk about what blah, 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 blah," and you just go on and say whatever you want and do whatever attack or mudslinging effort you've got going for yourself. And we've accepted it. We don't tolerate it. We've actually accepted it. You don't even need that. But we used to do that. And we did one of our first big research projects at Vote Smart was seeing what was happening. We tested this test. Oh, shoot. No, I don't want you to see this because this will tick some of you off. It's two fornicating rhinoceroses. Okay. Let's see if I can get this advanced to where I need it to be. Oh, no. Why are you not where you're supposed to be? Okay, right. Let's try right. Right there. Let's try right there. Yes, okay. Fornicating rhinoceroses was put in by the students as a joke. It was a pretend commercial. Some people laugh at it and some people don't think it's very funny. Okay, we tested this 10 years. Let me give you a little background. We organized 200 daily newspapers all over the country. All over the country. Some radio, some television, but mostly daily newspapers. We had national media involved. Fox News was a participant. CNN was a participant. The NewsHour was a participant. MTV was a participant. The participant that the students got the most fun out of was Rock, who was the big star in the World Wrestling Federation. He would start off every wrestling match by "Vote Smart, vote smart." We organized it all so that every single candidate for Congress got hit and hit hard to do the right and honorable thing and answer about 20 questions that we knew the polls showed the employers were concerned about and wanted somebody to do something about it, and they were likely to have to deal with it if they got elected to Congress. One of the hits had to be by a key leader of their own party from our board, whether it be Barry Goldwater or McCain or Dukakis or Geraldine Ferraro. By the way, my favorite combo on the board was Jerry Ferraro and Newt Gingrich. They joined together. And you can't help but, no matter who you are in the audience, you're mad at one of them, I'm sure. They had 6 weeks to do it. They were hit by their daily newspapers and editorials or sent letters on newspaper stationery. Won't you do the right and honorable thing and provide this information in a database that all citizens can easily access to see what you're likely to do on these concerns and compare it to whatever your opponent is? When we started the test, we tested the test for 2 elections. I mean, we were very precise. We are very precise at VoteSmart in terms of the research. When we formally started it in 1996, 72% of the congressmen were willing to do the right and honorable thing and take it. Every year, the percentage declined 2 to 5 percentage points. It kept going down. No, it's the exact same test, exact same effort. It continually declined until 2004, when the Knight Ridder newspapers went bananas and started putting chicken heads on them on the front page of their paper. They think they could drive it back up to 72. They didn't. And if you want to know who's least likely to answer a question directly on the part of the public, those are the people that have the most money, collect the most money, have the most ability to control message, and that's your incumbents, and why they get elected again and again and again. 1 out of 4 of them would do it. Please understand that the difference between Republicans and Democrats in performance on this test never varied more than 2 percentage points. Never varied. They behave exactly the same way. And here's some of the reasons, if you're a fast reader, why this took place. We have thousands of these, and these are just some that the students picked to show you. This story afterwards. One and my favorite is my home state of Arizona coming up here. A lot of people don't know that milestone was passed in 2012, and that was the year that more than 50% of the money candidates used to campaign with and advertise themselves with crossed the 50% line, and more than 50% of it was not used to show you what they would do, but show you what their opponent would do to you. Became attack ads. In 2016, it crossed the 80% line. When you contribute to candidates, I'm not saying you don't have some exception. I'm I'm not saying that there's no honorable candidates left in the political arena. I'm just saying in terms of a research practice across the board, when you contribute to candidates because you like them, you want to encourage them and bolster them for public service, that is not what your money will be used for. It will be used to trash whoever their opponent is, and the other side will do the exact same thing to you. We are all learning to hate each other. Be fearful of each other, because fear sells. It's not much different, really, than going into a movie theater and screaming, "Fire, fire!" You don't take the time to research and see if there really is a fire. You move. You're active. You move. And you can be almost that outrageous in politics today and make people move. And that's what's happening. Same thing in the news media. I know everybody is upset with the news media for one reason or another, because the old legacy media is long gone, the Edward R. Murrows and Cronkites and so forth. But when I was a kid in the 1960s, and I got involved in politics very early as a youngster, in 13, 14 years of age, I just thought the world of it, hung on all the conventions, and I don't know why I got locked down so quickly, but I was really locked in. Back in the 1960s, the news media's coverage of institutions and politicians was 71% positive. They allowed politicians to say what they wanted to say in full context without just depending on talking heads saying, interpreting it for you in one way or another. They talked about institutions in terms of what they were trying to do for society and whether or not they were being successful and things like that. But 71% of it was positive. Last year, 76% of it was negative, feeding off the fear. It sells commercials. It sells politicians. Congressman, I said this by accident the other day in a speech, and they thought I ought to repeat it to every audience. I don't know if it makes sense to people or not. I worked in Washington for years when I was in my 20s and 30s. It was much different back then. The candidates, the politicians, your elected leaders, most of them lived there. Their children all went to school together at Sidwell or someplace. They knew each other. They socialized together at the embassy parties in Washington and stuff. And it was kind of hard for a congressman to call his son's best friend Jimmy's father a bastard. There was a kind of sobriety that was built into actually knowing one another, getting to know one another. That doesn't exist anymore. They're all gone. They all live back in their home districts. Maybe not necessarily so much in California. I don't really know because you're so far away. But certainly with most of the rest of the states, that's an accurate statement. They don't know each other. The only thing they know is the last hateful thing said about them or their position or their issue. And it sort of feeds into it. And if you're honorable, and I presume most of you are honorable, imagine what it's like to run for a major office. Let's say you're honorable and you want to run for the U.S. Senate in California. You want to do the right thing. You want to talk about issues. You want to meet with groups like this and say why you're doing this crazy thing and what you're thinking and about this issue and that issue, and taking lots of questions and having a real discussion, real self-governance, real education, real information being shared. That's what you want to do during the election, and you're going to spend your time doing that because that's the right thing to do. Well, the chances are you're going to run up against a son of a bitch like me. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to spend all my time collecting money, lots of money. And when the time is right, I'm going to humiliate you in front of your children, your family, your friends, and your colleagues, and you will not be able to do a darn thing about it. Because you didn't collect all the money. You didn't do what I did. Very difficult for somebody to behave honorably in the old traditional way. I'm almost so close to the end of being negative, honey, wherever you are. I will say one more thing, my bailiwick. All of you remember civics education when you were in school, learning about government, the three branches of power, the Constitution, and going through your social studies classes and getting a sense of how valuable in the history and how important it was to defend this system, whether it be in the Revolution or the Civil War, whatever it was. You were pounded away in classes in schools. Well, just since 2002, even though it was already in decline, just since 2002, the educational curriculum in grade schools has decreased by another 32%. Another 32%. In high school, it's decreased by 66%. They don't get that education you and I did. On our board is the head of the largest social studies teacher organization in the country, Ted McConnell, and he told me just a few weeks ago when I was talking to him on the phone that they just did a study of millions of high school students and discovered that 15 million of them in the test said that a democratic form of government as created by the Founding Fathers was the worst possible form of government. The worst possible. He was horrified. They were all horrified at the results. That makes it fertile turf for people like me. That makes it fertile turf for candidates to get in there and peddle their goods in this hallucination that we've created about reality. I got to tell you that I'm not one of those that thinks the world is horrible. I just don't think the world is horrible. And the country is in a horrible position. You know, if I were sitting in the lap of God and God asked me what generation of Americans I wanted to be born into, I think I would be a fool. I think you would be a fool if you didn't choose ours. No generation of Americans has had it as easy as we have. You weren't here during the Revolutionary War when the country was being traipsed about by a foreign power. You weren't here in the War of 1812 when Washington was being burnt down in the White House and the president running into the mountains to save his life. You weren't here when we were slaughtering 400,000 of each other in the cities, in the fields, in the Civil War. You weren't amongst the 38 million corpses that were left out of World War I. You didn't sleep in the dirt under a bridge from the Dust Bowl in the Great Depression. You weren't amongst the 80 million dead in World War II. Hell, I got up this morning and I had a glass of orange juice from Florida. Maybe I should say California here. Should I say California? I had some coffee from Colombia. If I didn't like my breakfast, I could go down to any one of a number of grocery stores. And there were goods from all over the world in that grocery store. A lot of them prepared, heated, ready to eat. My lifespan, I'm supposed to be dead right now. A lot of you in this room are supposed to be dead. You're not supposed to be with us and hearing me. Our lifespan has increased by 17 years since the day I was born. If I want, I can get on this thing right now. She's just about to get up. And I can talk to my granddaughter who is about to get up and go teach skiing on a mountaintop in New Zealand and say, "Hi, how you doing, honey?" And if I want, I can go down the street, sit in a chair, and be lifted 40,000 feet up into the air while I'm sipping a spritzer and watching a Hollywood movie and be scooted along at 400 miles an hour and drop in and see her. I would feel ridiculous sitting next to Abraham Lincoln as he's slumped over in a chair and say, "Abe, you just can't believe how tough it is on us in 2017. What is really amazing is that our parents and our parents' parents and their parents before them went through those kinds of hellish times and handed off a golden goose, an incredibly strong and vibrant country that's going to be hard to knock down. It'll be, I mean, we can do it if we really get to dislike each other enough and be angry enough at each other. I mean, we can probably tear it down after a few decades, but it's going to be tough to tear it down. Enter Vote Smart. Here you go. This is the reason you all thought I was coming here. 4 minutes. This 4 minutes. Pay attention. The students did a great job of putting together a video that tells you how to defend yourself from the abuse. 4 minutes. I'll answer some questions. I'll say a few things afterwards, and then I'll take question and answer.
Imagine straightforward facts about any state or national politician on any issue of concern to you. It is perhaps the most hopeful reality in politics today. Hundreds of conservatives and liberals putting their differences aside and joining together to ensure that most essential component in our democracy, a citizen's right to the facts about the people they elected or those seeking to replace them. It's what U.S. News and World Report said would make the founders weep with joy. Thousands of hours of detailed research, all so that you can finally, simply, and instantly get the facts. I Spy. Take a magnifying glass and be able to instantly examine any politician's files, every biographical detail, every key vote in easy-to-understand terms, every issue position, every public comment on key topics, every special interest rating, every top campaign contributor. For example, just pick a category, such as ratings, and review every special interest rating that exists on the politician you selected, all there for you at votesmart.org. Political Galaxy navigates through the universe of facts. Name any politician, select any issue, and instantly arrive at every fact related to that person on that issue. For example, pick votes, and instantly you're transported to every key vote made on that issue in easy-to-understand terms. Find your political soulmate with Vote Easy. Simply enter your zip code and your area candidates will appear. Then state your position on any of a dozen of the most pressing issues facing our nation and watch as each politician's yard sign moves towards you in agreement or away, depending on their public records. Simply click on the sign to find out what facts made that sign move forward or back. Accolades for Vote Easy are already pouring in. Put it to the test yourself. Want more? Simply register any politician of interest to you. Every time that politician makes a public statement, votes, receives money, or a new rating on that issue, you'll get an instant update. No computer? No problem. Just call our toll-free research hotline and your own personal researcher will look up anything you want to know about any politician running for office, whether it's state, regional, or national. Bill Moyers called us a bright light. CNN distributed our materials to their affiliates. GovTrack and the New York Times have supported our work.
We are serious people on a very serious mission. It is the most critical dilemma of our time. Oh, shut up. Okay. It's been put together by 9,000 coming in, cycling over, students, non-paid students. It is it's an incredible database of enormous wealth of information for people that are interested. About 10 million people use us, that's all. It's a small percentage of the total American electorate. About 10 million have discovered us. Very few people know about us. The biggest users are Google, who gives us a nice big check, about $70,000 each year to give them special access to the systems. Same thing with Bing. The Defense Department, which uses us to keep overseas troops and State Department officials informed. Our biggest user by far, the only one that ever actually crashed our computers, came in one day and sucked every little bit of data we had out in one day, was, and this ought to tell you something, was the government of China. They were interested in factual information. We don't interpret any of this stuff, you know. We just make you able to access the information that you need to make an interpretation on your own. The next one, and we're always way behind. We have an IT department of 2 people. That's all we can afford. It's taken them 3 years to try to get caught up and get us on this thing. It's all on laptop right now. We've got it ready. We'll announce it not in August because nobody's home. But in September, probably not until October, we'll announce it. They've worked 3 years on it. It was supposed to be ready for 2016, but we just couldn't pull it off. We can't put all the data on here in an effective way. It's just way too enormous to do that on a little 2-inch by 3-inch screen. So what they've worked on is setting up a system where we constantly update and freshen the 20 most recent key issues that are being debated in Congress or you're seeing a lot of press about, and constantly freshen it so that you can plug into one of those issues and instantly see how your candidate or your representative relates to that issue. What he ever said about the issue or the concern, whatever rating he got, whatever money he got from that issue or concern, whatever vote he ever made, so you can instantly track them on this. We cover candidates. I mean, the easiest way to think of us is that what we do at Vote Smart is simply force the candidate to fill out an application of employment. That's all we do. And biographies are in enormous detail right down through most state legislatures. We have all the voting records in all state legislatures, not just the Congress, all designed in we have 472 political scientists, journalists, and other politicals helping our staff draft each piece of legislation in a 2 or 3 paragraph description, so you can see what the essence of it is without reading 300 pages. And if you want all 300 pages, you can just click on it and they'll give you the entire legislation. All of their speech remarks, almost 2 million now, speech remarks and interviews. Anytime a candidate says something or the news is immigration, you want to see what they've said about it, click on immigration on that candidate, and all of their public comments on immigration will come to you in reverse chronological order, starting with the most recent and stepping back through history. It just goes on and on and on. So that you can take this right into the voting booth if you want, and see exactly who somebody is on the issues that are of greatest concern to you. The last thing I will say is that this is nothing. This is absolutely nothing. They operate this thing with volunteers and student interns. A lot of our members show up and give a couple of weeks full time trying to help keep the database up. They operate on a budget that's wouldn't run one campaign for a congressional seat. We spend about 2 cents trying to defend you to every $10,000 spent to abuse you. It's kind of an unfair fight. But it's incredible what they've done. But it is nothing that compared to what we're capable of doing. Citizens are perfectly capable of defending themselves from this abuse. This is our generation's challenge. To recognize what is slamming us in the face every single day and deciding to do something about it. You are perfectly capable of defending yourself from this outrageousness that has overwhelmed our civic culture in the country, whether you be a Republican or a Democrat, conservative or liberal. It doesn't matter. You can defend yourself. We just simply have to decide to do it. These young students could use your help as they struggle to defend you. More importantly, as they try to struggle and defend the millions and millions of people out there that you are absolutely dependent upon for their good judgment. Thank you very much for hearing me out. I'd be glad to take any questions about how the process works or anything. I've been warned by Nancy that if you make a political speech, I'm to tell you to shut up. Okay, go ahead. She didn't say that. I'm sorry, Nancy. Yes.
I'm sorry. Do you track in any way the political positions of the major funders of these candidates?
No. We only track the money. And that is the one part of our database that we really don't do ourselves. For those of you that are interested in campaign finance and where the money comes from in great detail, we just have their biggest contributors if you're wanting to look at that on our database. But remember the name Center for Responsive Politics or Open Secrets. They're the organization that everybody, every news organization, every political researcher goes to that gets the quarterly reports of all the candidates and slices and dices it up in segments of information that you would find interesting if you're really into the research. Yes, hold on.
Your greatest audience is, like what age, what regions in the country, where you can build maybe most easily at this point?
She asked if there are any studies showing what demographics where most people are interested. Eureka! Well, it could be top billing with me. And it's pretty much an age group that is probably fits our demographics, we think, until we get on that cell phone. That will really expand our reach because everybody else is living on a cell phone today. But we don't really do studies like that. The regions of the country, California is a big user. Texas is a big, big user of our data. The last time I looked by state per capita, numbers of people per capita, but it's really hard for us to track that. We don't really have that information on people accessing our website. And most people coming to access our website don't type in votesmart.org and come directly to us. They're coming to us through Google or Bing or some other search engine, and we really don't have any way of, 90% of our users come to us that they never even see our homepage. They're just going right, because those people go directly to the data that they're. It's too bad they don't see our homepage because our homepage makes research pretty easy. Yes. He asked if we have any accounting of why they're. Yeah,
you mentioned that the education system is failing in terms of the information it was providing to people in the educational scene.
We don't know why that cutting is. We don't have any studies or research. You can make some surmise that a lot of teachers in the world are not tested on civics education and the knowledge of their students. They're tested on science or reading or math or something like that, and so they focus their time on where they'll be scored. A lot of people think that may be part of the reason, but there's a lot. We're no experts in that area. VoteSmart wouldn't know what. We just know that it's been cut. Yes, in the back there. Yeah.
So the information and the accessibility seems pretty invaluable, but what kind of projects are you undertaking in making people want the information and getting the horse to drink the water?
Excellent question, and the answer is none. We are barely able to keep the system alive and working. Almost all national foundations, very few people are interested in hearing me talk. We don't get many invitations to talk. I guess it's because I'm so depressing, huh, honey? Anyway, but we're barely able to keep the data alive and up to date and fresh. And now we don't have any advertising money. We did in 2008. In 2008, we spent $1 million with a bus that traveled. I think we had the bus actually in Eureka at one point, or one of our buses, tours coming through Eureka, all over the country advertising it. A survey showed at the end that we reached back then about 12.5% of the people could say they recognized VoteSmart and say with some vagueness what we did. All that money is gone. All national foundations have pulled out of voter education. All their money is going to get out the vote, voter registration, polling place security, things like that. They just, most foundations tend to be liberal, not all of them, but tend to be liberal, and they just, I scream at them, that they think voters are doing what they want them to do anyway, so they shove them into the voting booth without knowledge. Yes?
Yes, I'm curious. Regarding the presidential debates this past year, do you monitor that and get comments from your members, and do you relay that to the people who set up those presidential debates? Because I think that format should be changed.
Let me say, VoteSmart only does 6 things. We research the biographical backgrounds in enormous detail on politicians. We track their voting records in detail and convert those voting records into layman's terms so people can get a little bite of the apple and then see the whole bill if they want to. We put on our database campaign finances, number 4, the money, where their major money is coming from. We attempt to interview all the candidates and get their issue positions. And now, since so few of them do that, we now fill out the questionnaire for them based on the public record, send it to them, and say, are we wrong? Putting them in a box so that they can either say we're wrong and why and answer the question, or they get to stick with what we say their position is based on their public record. We collect all of their speeches every time they do an interview, every time they give a speech. We collect it and put it in keyword searchable databases. I think that's 6. Is that 6? I think but that's all we do. We don't go outside of that. We don't lobby, no matter how good you may think the concern is, or advocate causes, support or oppose candidates. We just try to enable citizens to defend themselves the way they see fit. Yes.
Has there been any research done on why people vote against their own self-interest?
We don't do any of that research. You've got to go to other organizations for that kind of background. We just do the 6 things I mentioned. Yes. I forgot my answer, so we're in the same.
So you track the candidates' speeches, but on the other hand, there's no tracking of the validity of what they're saying, so that has to come from another source? Is that?
Almost all news organizations use us to do that. There's a lot of fact-check organizations. The founder of fact-check organizations, a guy by the name of Brooks Jackson, who was with the Wall Street Journal and CNN, is now with Annenberg, serves on our executive board. They are very anxious to see us survive because we are not allowed to tell you somebody is a liar without endangering our 501c3 nonprofit status. We cannot get involved in politics, so we don't get into that wing of politics. We simply tell you and allow you to easily check whatever it is you want to check. Yes.
Vote Smart assumes that people vote will be influenced by the facts. But you stated that emotional appeals crush intellectual appeals. What makes you think human nature will change?
I know my dreams for Vote Smart are much dreamier than that. We could actually prove that democracy doesn't work the way we all had assumed and hoped it would, and the founders hoped it. We could be demonstrating that, and that could be actually the case. We don't know. My hope is, dream always has been, that we can set up a system that is so well known and so secure that we can enable people to run honorably and survive and win. That is much dreamier than what you're suggesting is going on, but that is why I got passionate about Vote Smart 30 years ago, was the only member of our board that was willing to toss in what was left of my political career and devote full time to it. But I don't know. There's no way to prove that people want to, when people, my view, I guess, personal view is that great movements in history take place when people are in pain, either financial pain or physical pain. That's what gets them out of the Barco Lounge or puts down the Budweiser and turn off the football game and get out and try to do something. I don't see that kind of pain in society, so there's a lack of that kind of incentive. This is an intellectual endeavor, very insidious. It's a cancer eating at the heart of our society. And that's why I say it's our generation's great challenge is to recognize it, see it, and decide to do something about it while there's still time. Thank you very much. I'll stick around for any more questions.
Let's thank Richard Kimball for coming to Eureka with us this evening, which was such a thoughtful and interesting presentation. And we have a small token of our appreciation, Richard.
Those are Humboldt products, so.
These are all from Humboldt, and we hope that it will be good for you. And before I sit down, I would like to thank this lady, Nancy Kay, and Ellie Gaynor. Ellie, where are you?
Ellie.
Nancy and Ellie were responsible for helping to put this whole thing together, so thank you both very much.
Well, thank you for coming. We're very happy to have such a nice turnout for Mr. Kimball. And please thank AAUW and the League of Women Voters. The committee we put together worked beautifully. It was a wonderful partnership. And Ellie Gaynor was the inspiration. So she brought him to us. So thank you. Drive carefully. Thank you for coming.